Good morning. Thank you for being here. Thanks for carving out time from your busy Finno schedule. It's so great to see so many family and friends throughout the audience here, so that's terrific. And I hope that I think we have something special to share with you. I've introduced something that, will be a little bit dynamic. We'll try something a little bit different together today, but we're gonna go for about 30 minutes and talk about a number of topics. What I'm gonna do first actually is just in an effort to illustrate how AI is changing everything, everywhere, all at once, I want to introduce you to a capability that's not associated with GitHub, but maybe you have it in your pocket associated with ChatGPT, which is advanced voice. Who's tried advanced voice? Beautiful. I had about an hour-and-a-half long conversation this weekend with AI, where it was actually teaching me technical topics. I know that sounds like I'm a real loser on my weekends. And it's pretty true. But so I had an amazing conversation, exchange while I was driving with AI. And so I thought it might be an interesting use case. Actually ask it to introduce me today. So we're going to go out on a limb, try something a little different. And I'm just going to go ahead and okay, we're here at the conference, and I'm ready for you to introduce me now if you're ready.
Fantastic. Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kevin Alwell. Kevin is the Director of Financial Services at GitHub with a wealth of experience in optimizing the use of GitHub and AI in financial services.
Do you mind? I'm sorry. Can you just make that a little bit less embellished, a little bit more straightforward for the folks who are here?
Of course. Let's keep it straightforward. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kevin Alwell, Director of Financial Services at GitHub. Kevin is here to discuss how AI is transforming software engineering in financial services. Kevin, the floor is yours.
Before you hand off to me, thanks for the applause. You got a thunderous applause. Before you do that, you were going to say some funny jokes about family and juggling responsibilities with kids too?
Got it. Let's add some humor. Ladies and gentlemen, give a warm welcome to Kevin Alwell, Director of Financial Services at GitHub. As a father of 2 young boys, Kevin knows all about juggling responsibilities. If you think managing code bases is tough, try negotiating with a toddler. Here to share his insights on how AI is transforming software engineering, especially in finance, here's Kevin.
All right, I won't ask you to say my name again. It was getting obnoxious, but you get the idea, right? It is just an amazing evolution in natural language and LLMs. And the technology is agnostic in that it can be applied to any domain. I'll give you just a brief example. I think I mentioned on Saturday, I was talking about a technical topic, and so it's an educator. But for my children, I have a 3-year-old son, and he's just trying to understand the boundaries of his world, and so he likes to do that through stories. And so he reads Franklin and he reads Peter Rabbit. And the most amazing thing that we can do together is during breakfast, my 3-year-old has a conversation with AI while I'm making eggs and failing at fatherhood. He's having a conversation with AI about Peter Rabbit and Franklin, but he's a main character in the story. And it's talking about the park across the street. And it makes it very real because Mimi and Beepa, Grandma and Grandpa, are also part of that story. So it's changing everything, everywhere, all at once. And I want to just share a few more stories with you before we dig into, kind of narrow the aperture on software engineering. I had the good fortune of going out to Moline, Illinois. Anybody ever been out to Moline? No, but anybody driven a John Deere? It's a special experience. They have 16,000 plus software developers on staff at John Deere. 16,000 plus software developers. And what do they build? Well, one of the things that they build is See and Spray, which is an attachment to this harvester machine. Okay, See and Spray will basically go across a field, hundreds of acres, autonomously. And with these 30-foot booms, it will see and spray. Surprise. It will see weeds in the field, and it will surgically apply pesticide to that field. It will see crops that are trying to grow, and it will surgically apply fertilizer. And so what does that do? It increases the yield for the farmer, and it eliminates tens of billions of dollars a year in spend on pesticides. The pesticide industry is tens of billions of dollars. So all that money is going back in the farmer's pocket, who then reinvests it and consumes a small share of it. And that's just looking at the economics of it, but the environmental impact's also pretty severe. Because the way you actually apply pesticide to these fields today, well, rather before See and Spray was you just send this giant plume of pesticide across the field, right? And that's how it kind of like lays on top of the crops. And so, by surgically applying it, you do that a lot more efficiently. So I'll stop surveying the audience here, but hopefully, I know some folks have been out in at Austin recently and other places where Waymo's been deployed. So Waymo's now driven 100,000 fully autonomous rides, 100,000 fully autonomous rides. Now think about that for the implications of your life and your experience, right? The average American commute is something like 45 minutes a day. Mine's a lot longer than that, but 45 minutes a day. What does that do? It gives you time back to do other higher value things and focusing on the road and changing lanes, et cetera, right? So it allows you to call grandma, it allows you to open your pull requests, it allows you to check emails. And so your satisfaction and quality of life are higher, but so is your output, right? And so here we have the substrate, which is AI, now impacting every aspect of our lives. And if you didn't believe it before, now you can believe it when you look at the volume of security research, specifically in AI over the past few years. So what LLMs specifically, again, narrowing the aperture here to specifically LLMs, what LLMs have allowed us to do is accelerate scientific research on AI, okay? And so what it does is it actually helps the researchers author more papers, right? And you're like, oh, well, that's a problem if the quality of those papers decreases over time. But they've actually found that the quality is not less, and we'll talk about what that, some assurances there. And one of the pieces of feedback that the economists wrote about a couple months ago was like, hey, there's this massive deluge of new research, but it's getting stuck in the pipe because the review process now requires us to have other researchers come and peer review those papers. And so we have a 100% increase in authorship, but we have the same bottlenecks for deploying, right, for actually delivering these research papers into production. And so their comment was like, well, we need to incentivize researchers to review this 100% increase in new papers. And so I wrote to the economist, and I'm like, you're missing it, right? Now you have to scale AI horizontally and cross that process. So you're not just focusing on code authorship or research authorship, but you're actually also providing a first pass to ensure the quality of those papers so that when a researcher goes to review them, you already have some input on the implications of that research, right? So AI is not just increasing authorship, but now we're seeing it go from just the kind of the left side of that, the workflow, all the way through to the end. And that's not dissimilar to the experience we had in software engineering. This slide should be familiar to you. This is what we've shared previously. GitHub Copilot. Let's talk about the implications. As of November of last year, Copilot had already written billions of lines of code in open source, github.com. So billions of lines of code are now being authored by AI. And so if you think you're not a consumer of a consumer of AI software, you probably are, at least through your supply chain. Where it's been deployed, it's writing about 1/3 of the code for developers, right, up to 1/3. Pretty standard across a scaled environment. Maybe 1/4 if you're focusing on more complex use cases. I mean, if this talk ended there like 18 months ago, it'd be like, holy smokes, this guy could have just said 1/4 of my code is gonna be authored by AI. That's amazing. And now everybody's like, yeah, okay, tell me something tell me something interesting, right? So it's pretty freaking amazing that we've gone there so fast. And I think OpenAI has been experiencing a lot of that themselves, right? They were the first platform to scale to, they're the fastest ever to scale to 100 million users. And so just to walk you through some data, so I want to substantiate some of the things we're talking about, and to do that, we have this survey that we've run for professional developers across the US, Brazil, Germany, and India, 500 developers in each area, and they provided some feedback. And one of the things that I think is really interesting here is just talking about how quickly these AI coding tools have proliferated in developer workflows. And so you can see most developers, if not all developers, have experimented with these tools either inside or out of work. Inside or out of work. Almost every single software developer. So it has become table stakes. And when you use it, you know why, right? The experience is pretty extraordinary. And, going back to that research example where initially it accelerated authorship of research papers, the GPT technology, but now we're shifting right of applying the technology more horizontally. You're seeing the same thing in software development. So I want to give you a few examples of what that actually looks like. And so we have this, it's a marketing slide, fair enough, but it's found means fixed. And so historically, for enterprise AppSec teams, one of their primary bottlenecks was not finding vulnerabilities, but the problem is that their vulnerability scanning tools for code vulnerabilities would produce this giant haystack of alerts. And then they'd have to kind of prioritize that haystack and put it on your backlog or your engineer's backlog, and then they'd have to work through those manually, right? And so what we're experiencing now by applying LLMs to this problem space is that we're experiencing AIs actually coming in and taking a first pass at patching those vulnerabilities. Taking a first pass at patching those vulnerabilities. And so here is a pull request I took a screenshot of, and we'll actually see it live in the wild in a moment here. But the idea is I, as a developer, inadvertently created a SQL injection vulnerability. Historically, a SaaS tool would detect that and put it on my backlog, and I would promptly ignore it and focus on other things, in my day-to-day. Now, with AutoFix, what you'll find is, this category of capabilities, you don't have to focus so much on the specific technology, the product itself. But the category of capability allows basically LLMs to get the context of your application and the implications of your pull request changes, and has a knowledge of the vulnerability itself in that context, and then it applies an automatic patch, right? So it suggests a commit to actually patch that vulnerability. And you can actually do this not just inside of a pull request, but we're finding AppSec leaders are actually applying this across their entire organization, their entire inventory of code, right? So you have this concept of running a campaign to eliminate all SQL injection vulnerabilities across your entire code base, which is the nirvana for these folks who for so long have been at loggerheads with your engineering leaders, because they're like, hey, we got all these vulnerabilities, we can't be shipping this to customers. Well, I have to ship these new capabilities because it has this business case behind it. Well, that business doesn't exist if we get penetrated by a malicious hacker, right? And so that's kind of the conversation that's always been happening. And now some of the data that has been coming out of the usage here, I just wanted to flash in front of you. It's, these numbers they're pretty extraordinary, and it's so easy just to blow past them and take them for granted. There is a massive acceleration happening, not just in code authorship, but also in vulnerability remediation with this technology. One of the early concerns that we got, similar to, again, going back to that research example, was, in that example, I think I talked about quality of research, but in this case, we have both code quality and security, right? And one of the primary objections early on was like, hey, well, is this going to introduce more vulnerabilities back into my code base? So what we've seen is actually the opposite, because you have filters now on code suggestions and many layers of checks and controls coming from both your existing SSDLC and AI. Every respondent thinks AI will improve code security, and we've kind of seen the same thing in the hard data from our side. And so you're getting more code that is more secure, and we'll talk about the quality implications in a moment. Let's talk about quality. So this is the experience that I was hearkening back to when I wrote to The Economist about the quality of research, and that the problem is not to apply more people to that problem, but to apply this technology to that problem that was also aiding authorship, right? And so here's a pull request. The AI understands the implications of the PR for the overall application. I'm actually coming in to review it. I mean, I wrote it myself, so I would be reviewing it, but I'm coming in to review it, and I want to have a conversation with an AI about those changes. And it's already taken a pass before I land there. And again, it understands the implications of that change, and then it does a code quality check. Well, and actually parses the entire document and understands whether or not there are improvements that can be made, whether that means in the context of efficiencies, right? Is there an algorithm that I can introduce or a piece of code that I can replicate that is more performant? Or are there just bad practices like I'm not catching an error? Right? And so I can have that conversation in real time with somebody who's informed. And so, you Slack me or you message me on Teams and you're like, hey man, can you review my pull request? And I'm okay, I go through, you have all the files changed, it takes me an hour and a half. But now I can come in and have this conversation and kind of, it not only accelerates my process for reviewing your code, but it's also more informed right out of the gate. And so this, going back to like bolstering the idea that code quality will improve with this technology. That's what we've seen in the hard data, and that's what folks like yourselves have told us as well, is that AI also increases the quality of your code. There are a handful, a small number of these AI developer tools that have kind of crossed the divide on code authorship. And they've gotten out of the world of kind of task completion, right, where you're working and you're developing some unit tests for a specific service that's open in another file. And they can actually implement, scaffold out an entire suite of tests for all your services inside of a web application, right? So you kind of just describe your requirements, and then we'll incrementally implement them, and you as a developer supervise that and provide incremental feedback, right? And then obviously kind of tailor it at the end. And so this is even going further than individual task completion. It's kind of automating a lot of the process, in fact. And I want to show you what that experience looks like in code authorship. And I think this works today in the current state really well with more rudimentary use cases, fair enough, but it shows you the direction that the technology is going, which has implications for everyone here. Quick time check, okay. All right, and then so you may ask yourself, okay, well, I'm a developer, and you're telling me I'm going to write, code 25% faster, and now you're talking about Copilot workspaces, and that's capturing more of the workflow, aiding more of the workflow. I think it leads to more software, which is great for everyone. It's deflationary. But you might ask yourself, like, what am I going to do with my time? Well, we have data that tells us what you are going to do with your time, and maybe this resonates with you. Maybe you'll do something a little different. Some things that stand out to me, though, excuse me, some things that stand out to me, actually, first I'll mention the third item here, learning and development. Actually, third and fourth, learning and development and researching and experimenting with emerging technology. And the reason I call those out specifically is because with this extra time, you're going to look at the latest technology and understand how you can bring that technology into your organization to further accelerate this flywheel of innovation. So it's like, hey, I'm giving you back time through AI, and then you're going out and using that time to find other accelerators, right? So this is only going to accelerate is the story that we're seeing here. And when we talk again about code quality and security, there's some feedback about developers spending more time designing systems and customer solutions. To me, that means you have more resilient platforms that you're deploying to your developers, because your developers have more time on their hands to talk about the trade-offs between different frameworks and tech stacks that they're bringing back into the org. And as we all know, if anybody's using a tool like Copilot Chat, you can have a live conversation with it about the implications of introducing an existing framework or technology back into your project, which is pretty extraordinary. And then, of course, I think this is probably undermeasured, taking breaks. I know when I work from home, I'm back and forth all day long to the kitchen, which is a bad habit. We have until 11:40. Nobody knows. I don't know either. We're going to keep going, friends. And let's see what some of this stuff looks like in the wild. And, I'm going to skip over some of the things that I think, again, are more table stakes because they've just become ubiquitous from the data, from what we've seen across our customer base. And that's GitHub Copilot Chat and completions for kind of more task-oriented work. So that's inside the IDE itself. And I want to help you explore the other ways that this technology is expanding horizontally across the platform or the developer workflow. So let's just start kind of poking around together. I have all these pull requests that I have open here and some older ones. Okay, cool. So all right, so I'm in a pull request, and okay, so we're going to do a couple like really simple things first, and we'll continue to explore down together. So I've added this terrible comment to describe the change of my pull request. I don't know if you've ever seen anything like this. By the end of by the end of the time you actually get it to work, you're just frustrated, and you're like, okay, this just does a thing, and and that kind of persists. I've seen PR comments, I won't say where, but it's like, fix this for a customer, So I always think that's interesting. So what Copilot allows me to do here, just saving me a little bit of time, is I can take a Copilot action and actually just generate an outline that describes the implications of my change, where those changes are happening. Again, just to create better documentation. You can always standardize on this. I'm just going to go ahead and update that comment live here. And so what do we get? So we get more description about the implications of our change. This way, when you're landing there and you want to do a review of this PR, that already exists, right? And that's more well documented with pointers. We removed a middleware layer. We added a new endpoint for this specific. Now you can actually see we've added a new endpoint. and some log statements and stuff. Pretty simple. Now, what I can also do is I can actually request a review from this request reviewer. And so that's asking Copilot itself to come in here, pull in my change, and understand whether or not there are quality or security implications of this change. And so that's going to kick off in the background. And this is kind of, this is why it was so obvious that, this is a part of the solution for moving that research process forward, is actually getting feedback from the tooling itself. And now I've introduced a vulnerability in this change. And so what you'll find from this, this automation is not only are we alerting you about this vulnerability, which has existed for, decades, I think probably 2 decades, but now we're actually automatically patching this vulnerability. So you can see now we're parameterizing this input rather than just appending it to the string itself. And you could commit that suggestion. So let's see if Copilot has dropped in its feedback for us yet. Okay, I'll wait for that to run in the background. In the meantime, I think one of the things I'd like to walk away with is actually a higher degree of familiarity with Copilot workspaces, which I think is underrepresented in most of the conversations we're having, because it's all about ensuring developers have an IDE AI in their hand, they're utilizing it, we're measuring that, and there's just so much more to this experience. And so I want to walk you through workspaces, okay? So here I have, this could be in Jira, I'm using GitHub, but it could be in Jira. I have a number of tasks. Create a new get book endpoint, get an individual book instead of a list of books from this library app. Create a corresponding controller. If the book exists, get it from the cache instead of the database, and then add some tests, right? So I'm going to come down here and open it in a workspace. Okay, so I had my issue, which documents my requirements, and now it's going to outline the specification, which has my current behavior, and then a proposed solution that it will come back with, okay? And so I can actually come in and modify this on the fly, so I just want to validate that the current behavior is as it says. And this is where, again, this is where my judgment will come in. No, the get book endpoint has not been created. No, the corresponding controller exists. No corresponding controller exists. No specs exist. Great. Yes, get book endpoint has been created. Corresponding controller. Okay, get it from the cache of exists, and then get book. Okay, great. So this validates the existing application, and then what the end state should look like. And so now we're getting a number of changes proposed here. And so let's see if I can. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and implement selected files. Okay, so now we're starting to see, across the files, you're starting to see those requirements actually getting implemented, right? And so in this index file, I'm seeing a new endpoint getting generated. Looks about right. It makes the assumption that this controller exists based on probably line 11, right? Because it get books. Now I get an individual book. And then it adds a new controller to get a book by ID. So it takes some input here. And so I almost said level 11. On line 11, you get the books from the cache. Line 13, you'll notice it's a secure use of the SQL query. And that's being suggested. Now we're going to get some specs here. Get books by ID. It should fetch a book, blah, 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 blah. Okay, I wonder if I can actually, revise and say, if you've ever gotten feedback that your tests aren't comprehensive enough, then you'll know why this matters, right? Okay, so it's actually going back to my spec file specifically, which is impressive that I even knew which file. Okay, great. And now I'm getting all these edge cases also accommodated. Return null if the book ID does not exist. Handle invalid book ID format. And then I'm going to just go ahead and create a pull request, generate a description, create PR. And now I'm going to get the AI to review the PR. If there's a vulnerability, to patch it. Pretty freaking extraordinary. Let's go to my PR. Okay, so here's the PR, fixes 21, implications of the change, request a review. It'd be interesting to see what, what feedback we get from it. But I'll go back to the other pull request just quickly. I think it was this one to see whether or not Copilot's commented there. Here it is. Okay, cool. Okay, cool. So, so it actually detected this vulnerability. Its primary purpose is not a SaaS tool, but something as apparent as SQL injection is available to it. And so, so it's telling me to parameterize my SQL query. This get book function is synchronous. It should be handled with a callback. So anyway, the point is not so much, the specific feedback that I'm getting as I'm talking to you now, as much as it is like, holy cow, this experience is changing extremely quickly, and we're embedding this technology in every aspect of the SDLC. And so if you think it was impactful inside the editor, that's only where you spend 25% of your time, or your developers spend 25% of your time. The rest of the 75% is in other areas of the workflow, right? And that's where we're working on integrating currently. And so I'm just going to go ahead and wrap this up and talk for a moment about how the folks we're working with are approaching the use of AI tools. You would have thought that financial services, the industry generally, would be on the laggard end of AI adoption, but actually, we've experienced that they are early adopters, and early adopters at scale. I mean, if you read the Wall Street Journal, there's American Banker, all types of outlets are writing about these massive institutions that are rolling out to all their developers, and that's good news, because there's a lot of benefit that they can get from it operating at that level of scale, right? And that's no different from the rest of the data we're seeing, which is that companies are generally encouraging the usage of AI. And if you're not, I definitely would strongly encourage you to maybe do so, at least explore it a little bit more deeply. And we are also anecdotally seeing this productivity polarity between those folks who are in the innovators and early adopters versus those folks who are kind of refusing to move, refusing to move to the cloud and then adopt cloud tools, including AI technology. And so I ask you before we go, where do you sit as an individual? Are you adopting AI into your existing workflows, whether that's something as simple as ChatGPT to ask it technical questions, or AI coding tools for any aspect of your SDLC? To your teams, have they standardized on using these tools in your organization and the institution you work for? Where do you all sit? And so that's a question to ask yourselves, and I'm asking myself. Thank you very much for your time.